Hey peeps, I am here because doing this video series on kind of the biracial experience. I wrote a blog called Uncomfortable Spaces a few months ago, and touched on like my upbringing about how I am biracial and just like the experience that I had went through. And a lot of you guys responded to that and just wanted to know more. So what better way to do it than bring on a friend? So this is Brittany, and I'll kind of just be going through a video series. We'll do about 3 or 4 of them to just talk about our experiences and just go deeper into what the biracial experience is like. So yeah. So this is Brittany.
Hello.
What else can we know about you, like your family and all that?
So I guess I'll start by saying that I am half black and half white, obviously, and my mom is white and my dad is black, and I grew up in San Diego, California, finest city in America, and pretty much middle class growing up throughout my childhood. And I would say primarily I feel like I grew up in a pretty white culture, I would say. The white part of my family is based in San Diego, and so I spent a lot of time around them. But my other side, my dad's side of the family, is on the East Coast, and we didn't spend a lot of time traveling over there or really spending a lot of time with that side of the family, unfortunately. And so because of that, I would say my household primarily just had kind of like a white culture, and so I think that definitely affected how I grew up and how I understood my own identity as a mixed person and what I identified with. I mean, we'll get into that a little bit, but that's pretty much that. And then just also too, like my faith background, that had come later on in life. It wasn't really strong growing up, but I am definitely a Christian. So
Awesome.
yeah.
So kind of let's go back on the identity piece. When did you recognize? Because I knew, like, for me, recognizing that I was biracial kind of like took a turn for just my life.
No, for sure. And I think as I think about that, for you kind of recognize it early on, would you say?
Yeah.
And so as I think about that experience, it wasn't such a strong moment or realization for me early on, other than looking at kind of my family members and my white family members recognizing that they don't look the way I do, right? So just having that general understanding. But I think even deeper, right? So not just what I look like on the surface, but what it means to be biracial. I kind of came to understand that later on, and a memory that is pretty strong in kind of my experience was kind of early on in college during the Trayvon Martin case that occurred. I spent the entire summer watching that trial from start to finish and experiencing that, seeing how the media was going about that, and just the conversations that came out of that really started making me realize that, okay, I am mixed, but what does that mean for me? What do I believe about the issues at hand and how I step into the conversation regarding racial issues and just really my identity. Like, what side am I on, As unfortunate as that is to say, but that was something that I came to realize growing up, and that was like a marker for me, I'd say.
Yeah, and you mentioned that trial, like, kind of just like you experienced some tension, like internal tension.
Right.
Can you just elaborate a little bit, like what that felt like on a deeper level?
Well, to be honest, so with the case, if you're familiar, obviously the man on trial was a white man. I think he was Hispanic. But anyways, basically took the role of a white man. And Trayvon, was black. And so as I was experiencing that trial, I started to kind of see the the white and the black issues of like my mom represents, like she's white. So if we're talking about a white man and seeing him as the enemy, well then you're talking about my mom almost, right? Like you're talking about that side of my family, and vice versa, right? The victim or the individual that was lost in whatever case we're talking about, like that represents kind of the other side of my family or represents my dad. And so as a young, I mean, barely out of high school, experiencing this trial and the conversations that were being had and the assumptions that were being made and just the way it was handled, I just felt like that was the tension of like I was at war with myself because I didn't know what to believe, and what thoughts to have, really, besides the facts of the case and what was happening. But then some other comments, other racial comments that were being made that again, I had to think about, just in my own context.
Yeah. Can you tell me which race do you more identify with? I've been asked that sometimes, and I struggle with that one.
For sure, and I do too. And as we've been talking about that, I've just come to a realization about it. And I feel like, and I think a lot of people mixed people can relate to this, is that depending on the room that you're in, you almost pick one race or the other, based on the circle that you're in or whatever is at hand. I think sometimes that's how I feel, where it's just kind of more fluid, because we are both, and so we have that ability, I think. But when I think about, and we were talking about this, when I'm sitting in an empty room, when it's just me and there's not some type of situation or conversation at hand, but just who I am individually, what race do I identify more with? That's still something that I think I'm struggling with or wrestling with, based on how I grew up. Well, I was exposed more so to the white culture. Obviously, since being an adult, I think I've had a fair experience with both cultures and understanding of it. But I also do like the ability to say that I identify with both equally. And I think that's something that should be, understood as well, that we shouldn't always have to feel the need to pick one or the other, but that we can identify with both. And that's totally fine and okay.
Yeah.
And actually realistic, or a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's not talked about enough of how it's not even just like a feeling, like I feel like I'm both. It is factual. It's like I come from 50% this, 50% that, which makes me both. And
right.
For someone to ask, like, you gotta choose, or you act a certain way more than the other, or you look a certain way more than the other, so you should consider yourself here. It's just not true. It's not, and it doesn't feel, it doesn't, I hate the word feel for this topic, but like internally, that's not what happens when we're in certain situations. It's I am both, and it's its own it's its own race in a way.
Right, and I think going off of that, and we've talked about it, is even within that, sometimes we can be in situations where we don't feel black enough or white enough, depending on the room that you're in or depending on the conversation that's being had.
Yeah.
I think I've definitely experienced that with friend groups or even in an academic setting. I think that is part of the tension and the struggle that we can have as mixed people, is that certain people don't see you full. You're just not black enough for this conversation, or you wouldn't understand. Or the white experience, you're not fully white, or you just wouldn't understand something. So that's definitely an experience that we've had.
Yeah. Let's go on a lighter topic. Let's talk about hair.
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 Yeah. What do you want to know about hair?
Good. hair.
Good hair.
What's your thoughts? We didn't talk about this, but what's
Yeah.
your thoughts on the term or just like, oh girl, you got the good hair, like you don't have to worry about nothing.
Well, I mean, I understand where it's coming from. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm well aware that, that one can have pretty difficult hair.
Mm-hmm.
You know, depending, just depending on the type of texture you have. But, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it is. I definitely have hair that's easier to manage. I mean, if that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But at the same time, hair is hair, and I think all types of hair are beautiful and in their own right.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
So what was your like experience like growing up, like having, you know, a white mom, or just like what hairstyles did you go through?
Yeah, not very many. So growing up, yeah, I mean, didn't really have any idea what it meant to have ethnic products in the household. That wasn't a thing. Pretty much was just brushing it back, putting it in a ponytail, and that was it. Which wasn't too big of a deal because I was a tomboy anyway, so got the job done. But yeah, I mean, I just growing up, like I said, primarily, you know, in the white culture, I just didn't have a lot of education around hair at all, and that's a big part of black culture.
Yeah.
And I just didn't have that. I didn't have that growing up, and so as a young adult, getting more into being able to have, you know, manage my own hair, you know, and have the right products and understand it the right way is something that I'm learning. And even because I'm in a biracial marriage, right, so my husband's black, thinking about as I have children and the type of hair texture they're going to have. Mm-hmm. It's not guaranteed they're going to have my hair. Right? It could be different types of textures. So even with that in mind, wanting to connect more with that, because I didn't get that growing up, is important so I can be prepared for my own kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that too.
I am.
Like, you know, what will their hair be like? And now that I know growing up through that experience,
seriously,
I know what not to do.
Right. At least be more prepared and
Yeah.
you know, learn as much as you can.
Yeah, for sure.
To be prepared for that. But yeah.
Speaking of kids, how is it, or not how is it, but just your marriage, like who are you with? Describe your significant other and all that jazz.
Sure. I mean, yeah. So Tevin Mitchell, okay, is a full black man, and so that's So basically, like I said, I'm half white and half black. My husband's full black, and so even within that, we have some pretty interesting conversations within our marriage regarding racial issues, and also educating one another on the black experience and the mixed experience and the white experience. I think is the cool thing that I think we get the advantage of in our marriage is for me to be able to speak on that. That, you know, otherwise I don't think he would have that, you know, at least in an intimate relationship. So I think that's something I think about is an advantage for sure. But has its challenges, but again, it's all about growth. It's all about growth and having the hard conversations, even with your spouse, and being honest with your racial identity and the thoughts that come with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
For sure.
Well, I just wanted you guys to be introduced to Brittany and just get a little bit of her background so that our next videos you guys can have just some background knowledge on who she is, and you know, the next topics are gonna kind of go in a little deeper, a little more serious, and just you know, talking about bringing up some of the racial issues that can happen in our world today, like just talking about, you know, the biracial experience, because
it's not talked about as much.
Yeah, it's not, and so I think we have some good conversations coming up, and so stay tuned.
Let me say this though before we cut.
Oh yeah.
Okay? If you have not read Lauren's blog, All right, if you're just jumping on here for the first time and you've never read anything she's ever written, tell them where to go. Where can
Go to simplylbperspective.com.
Okay, and catch up. Catch up.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be great, for sure. All right. See you next video.